A pleasant good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to Swerve with me. This is a show where we have adult conversations for mature audiences only. I am Miranda Innes, and it's always a pleasure to come to you each week and talk to fascinating people who have overcome challenges and they're not afraid to show their scars and to speak their truth. Tonight is certainly not going to be any exception as you go in. Good night, Joe. But you know what to do. Please share the live stream because tonight we're talking God, we're talking family, we're talking country. We're talking to someone who has dedicated his life to public service over the years, and you'll learn a little bit more about him. So before I bring him in, go ahead and share tonight because this is going to be the kind of conversation that if you are uncomfortable with speaking truth and listening to truth, you may get a little agitated. So that's my preface. That's my warning. That's my disclaimer in advance as before we get into this conversation. Good night, Renee from Canada. Good to have you. Joba's in Florida. Good to have you too. So as you come on in, good night to all of you. My audience is international, so they're viewing from around the United States, the Caribbean, in particular Guyana, and Turks and Caicos, of course, throughout the Bahamas, across the U.S., Canada. So it's good to have all of you. Good night, Sophia McKinney. It's good to have you here tonight as well. So my guest tonight is he's a grace child, and I call him a child of grace because he's the fifth of 11 children. He's the fifth of 11 children. And so he knows what grace is all about. He happens to also pastor a church called the Grace Center right there in Nassau, Bahamas. He is a community activist. He is someone, when I think about him, I think about consistency and persistency. And he has been a former police officer. He's a businessman. He's a husband. He's a father. He's a grandfather, all rolled into one, and so much more. And more importantly, in this capacity of the conversation that we're having tonight, he is someone that has decided once again to offer himself for public office. And by that I mean he has offered himself as a candidate in the Carmichael constituency in Nassau, Bahamas for the Grand Commonwealth Party. We'll talk about that. So don't get it wrong. Tonight is not a conversation about politics. We're talking to Glen P. Rolle tonight. And we're talking to him about his why. Why have you decided as a pastor once again to throw your hand into the race? We're going to talk about that balance between church and state. We're going to talk about what he has to offer. We're going to talk about what constituents need to look for, voters across the diaspora. For those of you who are non Bahamians, there's a general election coming up in the Bahamas on September 16th, where we will choose the next party that will govern the Bahamas for the next 5 years or so. And so while I said the conversation isn't about the politics as much as we want to know this man, Glen P. Rolle, who he is, what he has to offer, and what the wisdom that he brings to this conversation tonight, I believe will be useful for all of you in attendance. So good night, Auntie Liz. Good night, Newton. Good to have you. Connors, good to see you too. Carolyn Cooper, good to have you. So, Glen P. Rolle, welcome to Swerve with me.
Wow, I mean, I am so proud of this moment. Our we have a significant history. I can't disclose where you are. I believe that may be under FBI and other stuff like that.
It really
But
ain't that serious.
but just to think of the idea that I'm engaging somebody who I know brings so much to the table. And we were talking a little bit earlier, just looking at the imagery. Forgive me if I could say it in this way, the sense of calm, the sense of finding my space. And sometimes you need a bigger space to flap your wings. And I am so proud of this moment. I think without, I'm probably a smiler, but but just to look at the reflection, it brings that kind of ease and smile. So I look forward to the conversation. Quite honestly, when you hit me up earlier, my mind kind of went in another place. I said, boy, this is politics time, and this name is such a good name to advise and put you in a certain place, and and polish you up in a sort of public way. And I was saying, God, is this a sign that my angel has finally come? So
Not.
so just to have this conversation is an important conversation. I do get a chance to slide in and watch you from time to time,
Thank
and
you.
the level of conversation, the level of thoughtfulness that goes into the conversation. And sometimes when I talk about a bigger space, I'm not just talking about a geographical location. I'm talking in the context of paradigm, mindset, experiences that people go through. And quite honestly, without getting into any aspect of the conversation, that is one of the whys. That is one of my why in terms of what this moment called for, in terms of the level of engagement that I think should be evolved between the electorate and those who are going to make the decision. All of those things that we go into it. I mean, we're talking about age in a little bit, but we're no longer just 15 years as a country. We're smack in the face of our 50th anniversary, our jubilee. And that word in of itself supposed to take on certain meaning. But if the conversation level is not there, then 50 years would come and we wouldn't even realize it. And so I look forward to engaging with you. Certainly, I have some whys as to where I'm at this point. You may
Mhm.
even say, well, you may say, Glenn, man, you going at this again?
So hey, let's get there. But I like to start at the beginning. I like
Yes.
to start at the beginning so that the audience will be able to appreciate the steps that
Mhm.
the person has taken to
Mhm.
arrive at the conclusion where they are right now. So tell us, who is Glen P. Rolle? Who is he?
Uh, I am getting up in age, and life is something that is evolving. So if you ask Glenn Pirol, who is he 3 years ago, perhaps the answer would be different from where I'm at now, and perhaps it'll be different from where I'm at 5 years ago. But I do believe that there are some steps that when I look back, uh, I'm not surprised or shocked in terms of where I'm at. And what do I mean from that? We're from the island. I notice you have a significant amount of persons who listen to you internationally. We're from what we call the family of islands, and for the Bahamas is an archipelago spread significant miles. It's just not Nassau, not just Freeport, and so our very upcoming or in terms of transition meant different islands had different experiences, and the extent to which those islands experiences help to shape and define us as a people. So I'm from an island called Exuma, and then Exuma have their own keys. So I'm from this area that they call Black Point Exuma. And for those of us who appreciate to some degree, let's say the late 60s, early 70s, can appreciate the fights and the struggle that we as a Black people would have had in terms of oppression, in terms of being ruled by the minority. And I'm saying this in the context of those steps. But part of my experience, Miranda, was my mother. My mother was involved, and she was the postmistress, which meant that everybody looked forward to a meal, so to their meals. So she was very much in touch with the community in that way. That was to her a public service. They use a home. Up to this day, I don't think we got paid for the use of it yet. I should send the bill in. But anyway, she saw that as a noble call, and in addition to that, missionaries came to the island, and when missionaries were not there, she played the role as the pastor, the preacher, whatever have you. So that was in the context. But but in all of those things, she was focused on how best she can serve, how best she can give back, how best she can contribute. And even if that comes at a certain price, even if that comes with sacrifice, she understood, or she took that on as her responsibility. And so that equally evolved into getting involved in politics. Those of us who understand the foundational history of the Progressive Liberal Party, who for the most part was seen as marshaling the voice of ordinary people. She was a stalwart in that, in the context of playing an integral role in the exumas, an integral role in terms of getting the member of parliament elected. And I don't know, you mentioned the fifth child.
Mhm.
I don't know why the fifth child ended up being in the boat with her, going over the waters and seeing her sign her name to the what they call a nomination paper at that time for one George Smith. But I think early on she was taking me through the steps that when a nation is oppressed, when people are looking for answers, that governments and public service can be an important component in terms of the development of the people, in terms of the upliftment of the people, in terms of really bringing the kind of relief and hope. And so she believed it. She believed in that, and that's the exposure that we were given to. So it's 11 of us. I happen to be number 5. And by the way, including that, I did write a book on the mantle of grace. So you are dead on with that. So having said that, uh, uh, um, um,
So
all of our,
let me interject right here because I want to guide the story along
okay,
so that
okay.
we can maximize the time. So her active participation in civics, in social life, in the politics of your island of Exuma is what influenced you at a very early age.
At a very early.
At some point you would have relocated to New Providence, went to high school there, graduated, went on to police college, and served as a police officer for some 20 odd years.
Yeah.
So that was also another step as an act of public service, obviously, being a
It,
police officer.
yeah.
What I want to know,
Go ahead. Sorry for that.
yeah, what I
Go
want to
ahead.
know, I'm going to guide the story along.
Okay.
What I want to know is the decision to leave the police officer, because I want to get in right into your why. And so
Okay.
having that background of seeing somebody actively serving their public all the time through all the work that your mother was doing, when did you, Glenn, come to that point when you decided maybe this is something that I should be doing? Was it was it a spiritual awakening? Was it a prompting? Was it an encouragement from someone? When did you decide? Because this is not your first time offering yourself as a
Mhm.
candidate. So let's talk about what drove you to make the decision the first time.
But I mean, it's an interesting journey, like you said, and laying the foundation with my mom was an important part, and obviously public service, 21 years was an important part. But you know, you can't make these stories up, right, Miranda? That part of my 20 years, my first 12 years was around what we call Linden Finland, the father of the nation, the
Okay.
political mastermind, if you like. And that responsibility led me to not only see up front a man walking this thing out, but I personally feel I fell in love with a man who was dedicated to service. It began from 5 a.m. in the morning, walking the streets, etc., etc. And I saw his mannerism, and up close as a police officer, I became really absorbed in that element of it. And then, you know, my job also allowed me to meet a significant amount of leaders from different parts of the world, man. Nelson Mandela to work with him, etc. So it seemed as if I was always in the face of public servants, in the face of people who could make a difference in their country. The strange thing about it, when I left the police force and transitioned into another level of community service, it was not so much to get involved in politics. I just felt at that time that the church, the spirituality, the spiritual component of it. I needed that kind of freedom outside of the boundaries of the police force, so that whatever I come to say or believe, is consistent as I move forward. And so obviously there was a period between me leaving the police force and going into the church when I took that on. But the idea of public service never left me. I always thought, even within the context of the church, it was about community service. It was about being a voice for the least. It was about how do we give back to the community. And so that stream continued even in those years. I think what drove me to the idea of politics is perhaps when Sir Lyndon died. When Sir Lyndon died, when I heard the news, I don't share this much in a public way, but I was driving on Tamilo Butler Highway, and when I heard the news, I was in my car, and it's as if my gut turned over because I felt a sense of loss. I felt a sense of where do we go from here? And of course, that followed with Dr. Miles, who, again, I had opportunity to be in his space as a teacher, as a trainer, as a mentor. And so his concept, his message, his preaching was always about this church in a much broader way, in its responsibility to government, in its responsibility to nation building. And at one point I went in and I had a private conversation with him in terms of what I was experiencing, the conflict I was going through. And he sat me down and he brought me into understanding that, no, this is not some strange feeling that I'm having, that really the church and the state have a certain kind of union, a certain kind of relationship. And when he passed, one of the things that he said before he passed was the fact that there must be a country somewhere in the world where the kingdom of God is expressed and the values of the kingdom. And so his message always sort of highlighted in my mind that this idea of nation building must be beyond politics. This idea of nation building must be a God idea. And so the transition or the conflict became no more because I then saw no separation between what I was doing in the church and what needed to be done within the context of the nation. And so I have always operated in those same space. And
Okay, let me just interject. If you're just joining us, good night, welcome Antonio Miller, Loretta, Naoka, Della Reese, Ethel. I'm talking to Glen P. Rolle, who has offered himself as a candidate in the upcoming general election on September 16th in the Carmichael constituency. And I wanted to talk to him. I don't want to talk about the politics and the negativity and all that stuff. I'm really trying to steer this conversation as to his why. And you mentioned the church. You are a pastor, the pastor of the Grace Center.
Mhm.
So you pastor people, obviously, of multifaceted people, various political beliefs and everything. As a pastor, and offering yourself as a candidate before, is that a conversation that you would have had with the church? Or is that an understanding? What does that look like? You saying I'm offering myself, and is there a conflict? You said there's no conflict with you because you see.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
No, I'm saying you said there's no conflict. I mean internal conflict because
Yeah, yeah,
you see the union between, as far as you're concerned, church and state. But
yeah.
I want to remember this is a show we have adult conversations, and
I
so
get you.
the conflict. What is that like going before people and saying the people that you believe you're called to serve and obviously who
Mhm,
follow you? I'm
mhm,
now offering myself your as not just as your pastor, but now I want to be a member of parliament. That's what we call
mhm,
it in the Bahamas, to represent a
mhm,
constituency, a
mhm,
group that's much more vast than you are. What
mhm, mhm.
Tell me, what was that like?
But I mean, I think you would always, and I think you laid the foundation, right? In terms of while I may be settled with certain things, and I went through my own level of back and forth with it. So obviously, the people who you serve, rightfully so, would have that same concern, etc., etc. You have to, I mean, even before you get to the church, you have to have this conversation with your home, you know.
Mhm.
And Miranda, you know more as much as I do in the context of church and pastors and politics. That's almost like a taboo, you know. That there are certain mindsets and hurdles that you overcome. Uh, um, but I think there was a part of me that was not deliberately stubborn, but necessarily stubborn in terms of belief system, in terms of how do you press forward. And so yes, on the one hand, you have to try bring people along, all right. But on the other hand, I think part of my walking through it was that you may not be where I'm at now. So what I will not do is I will not use the pulpit as a partisan uh, 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 place to express. And so as a preacher, I think I've always been guided by what I sing, because I think anyone who is in that position has such a stewardship to the truth and how they present it, that even without me saying stepping into that arena that may present a little challenge here or there based on the mindset of people, that you would not do so without regard for, and that you would be guided by the truth. And so I think I've tried to live my life in that, in terms of what I present. I also think that from the very beginning, in terms of, when I left the police force and came into church, um, just as Miles Monroe was known for saying certain things, I think I kind of developed that same sense of, okay, if you're going to come to this space, here is the message that I believe I've been given. Here is the message of the kingdom. Here is how I think it is expressed. And so I think that made it, if not totally acceptable, I think that made a marriage that said, well, okay, this is election time. Pastoral is going to be there. And then at no point was I not on the public space, being an advocate, being a voice for justice, because that is the picture that I thought I presented in terms of understanding what the role of the church is: a voice for social justice, a voice to speak up for the poor. And this one of the conversations that I would have had with Dr. Miles that sort of settled me. When you look at that role, and when you look at what I said earlier in terms of my mother's role, then you could see that line almost coming into. So in short, I try not to use the pulpit in what we would refer to as a political way. So just as you having this conversation with me and avoiding all of the other trappings of politics as we know it, I wouldn't want to be named amongst me that Glen used the pulpit to express that type of thought or thinking, even if he differs in terms of policy. And so we try to have those thought, kind of what I call mature adult conversation. And so now at this stage, the third time around, I think I'm fully understood, fully embraced. The idea of righteous governance is something now that the Bahamians are sort of hopeful for. But we had to overcome significant hurdles, mindset, and the way people think. And people began to see it happen. They began to see pastors entering politics. They may be disgusted in terms of sometime what it works out to, but they expect righteous people to use whatever platform and influence to be a voice for justice, to be a voice for equity, to be a voice for the least amongst them. And in all of my 20 plus years, I guess that's what I've been seeking to do.
So, and I'm going to push this a little further as far as the church and state and your why. So you're, as far as you're concerned, based on what I've heard, it's for you, it's an extension of who you are, offering yourself for public office now outside of the confines of the walls of the church.
Mhm.
How then should you be elected to office? How do you see your role changing or expanding as pastor? Because as a constituent, We know that the demands on parliamentarians are great because whereas you may have had, let's say, hundreds in your church, you now have thousands in your
Mhm.
constituency that expect you, as members do, to be at their beck and call. They expect you to show up and you need them. It's a delicate balance. How do you see yourself striking that balance between maintaining the integrity as a pastor and being there for your members? And should you be
Mhm.
elected to parliament, being able to serve the people that have elected you to office as well? Because I know you thought about it. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
how do you see that working for you?
Obviously, like I said, that's concern, right? What I like about your show is that everybody who listening to me should get enlisted into the Swerve show, right? And one of the reason I say that is because life is about movement. Life is about different space and transition. But it also means people must change. I mentioned my journey from the island and coming to NASA, et cetera, et cetera. And it's not to negate or make void what you just said, but I do think that the nation itself have to find a way in which we are growing up. That we would have faced the biggest challenge ever in terms of Hurricane Dorian. That we're undergoing significant challenges now as we speak as a nation. And to me, all of these things represents what I call external forces that should push us in a certain kind of mindset that should say to us that, hey, you are at this mountain for too long. You have to move on. And so I think part of the response to your question is that I believe the country is growing up. I think people are understanding that, hey, my MP may not have to be this no more, but I do expect that they be men of integrity. I do expect that they lend their voice to things that matter to me. I do expect that they put in place the kind of system and support system that no, I may not be able to reach him, and I'm not bothered by not able to reach him because he have in place different tiers and different levels of leadership. They're speaking biblically. At one point, Jethro said to Moses, "Say, hey Moses, you can't do this thing alone." So entering politics versus church, etc., etc. I think the country itself have to grow up to the idea that we are not called to do it alone. That we are called to have support system. My God, already talking about what your program is, etc. We are called to put all of these different things in place if we are going to lead this effective life. And so while you may have what I call little pushback, and while you may have some people who feel that you're stretching them, we will all be better off by the stretch because the circumstances around us are so global in nature. We cannot afford to not stretch. We now have to think about a nation where tourism may not come every day as we know it. We now have to think about a nation where we may not have the means and the resources outside as we know it. So life itself imposes on us to the place where we grow up, where we mature, where we put on adult clothing. And so the kind of representation that I believe the Bahamas is looking for is not necessarily the representation where you have to be at someone's door every day, but they do expect a certain standard. They do expect that certain policies will be working on their behalf. They do expect that opportunities will be available for them. They do expect that the children would have access to the finer things of life in the context of education, in the context of a social life, in the context of opportunities to further their career. Where we do those things, then I think this marriage between pastor and church, because when you look at it, Miranda, there is no real social difference between those who serve in government and those who serve within the context of pasture. I was hungry and you feed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was in hospital and you came and supported me. So all of this becomes a part of what I call the social responsibility to humanity. And I think the conflict or the lack thereof gives you the opportunity to move from the 100, what I call box environment, now to an open space where the community becomes beneficial. And where did this mandate come from? This mandate came from the teacher himself. Go ye into all the world and make disciples out of nations. So what did we see as a result of COVID-19? We saw churches shut down. So in the context of life, you must say, how does this affect my swerve? Well, it may mean that the church may now have to extend itself beyond its borders, beyond the four wall, and begin to go out there. And so I see this as a tremendous opportunity to extend it, as you say.
You say all the idealistic things,
Mhm.
but the reality is, it doesn't just happen like that. And
I got you. I
there's
got
a
you.
lot of work that
Mhm.
has to be done to bring people to a change of mindset. And I want to acknowledge that, because
Mhm.
everything that you said in my opinion, is really great and wonderful.
Mhm. Mhm.
And but that takes work, and that
It
takes
takes work.
extensive and intensive work to
It
get
takes
people
work.
to a place
Yeah.
where they could accept the fact
Yeah.
that pastor is not going to always be here, when I want him to be. And we know how, I'm going to say, average church folk
Yeah.
go.
Mhm.
They don't want to see the deacon and the minister and the whoever
Mhm.
when they
Mhm.
need something in some respects. Again, and this is how you train, and how you would have developed, your local congregation. But
Mhm.
mostly they want to see that pastor, they want to see that lead person. You don't have to respond to this. I'm just
Mhm.
making a statement.
I got you. I
That
got you.
takes
Yeah.
work. That takes a lot of work to get people to that place where they begin to accept. And that work starts before you would have said, hey, I'm offering myself
Mhm. Yeah.
as this
Yeah.
person. And what I found from my history of working in ministry is, once people don't respect the leadership, the tears that are in place to that degree, then you could have some major problems. Major
Yeah.
problems. But
Yeah. Yeah.
let me read this comment. Good night, Anissa. She says, Pastor Roll, in my view, the Pastor Roll has, in my view, the integrity and diplomacy to address such challenges when it comes to the needs of his church. And should he be elected constituent? So that's somebody who's saying they believe you have the capacity to manage those things that we had discussed. Good night, Mom. Good night, Antonia Miller. She says, great answer. Pastor Roll. Dioka says, you're right, Miranda. So anyway, let's move on. So we're
Yeah.
talking about your why. Okay, so why am I doing this? Because I see this as an extension of my work in ministry, to take it to a broader stage,
Mhm.
in the constituency. Now I want to shift some focus and ask you, what does Glen P. Roll have to offer these people, and why should they seriously consider voting for him?
That's a good question. I want to speak first before I get into the Carmichael constituency where I'm at. Again, I think you allowing me to speak of years to this point is an important part, because I'm the kind of person who almost build block on block.
Mhm.
So I don't separate early years from where I'm at, right? And that's one of the reasons I talk about Celine Pinland, almost this godly admiration for within the context of nation building. And so I have this imagery of him, Eddie Hernandez, and the kind of work that they would have done in terms of bringing the people, just like you said, because it is practical and it is hard work, bringing the people in a short period of time from an oppressive place to the place where they wanted to accept this idea of independence, this idea of freedom. this idea that we can be masters of their own destiny. And so when you follow that along with the public service and the teaching of Dr. Miles, then for me, I see this nation as having the opportunity to be the model of nations. You know, you where you are, I don't see that simply to mean that you become where you are, but rather you have an opportunity to shape everybody around you. Because in my mindset, the Miranda Inners of the world have what I call this superior mind, not because they're superior, but because I believe that God has so shaped this nation in such a way that if we come to an appreciation for who we truly are, then we would shed ourselves of certain thinking. And so in the context of the Bahamas, I am always offended when we are dumbed down. I am always offended when the voice of the least is seemingly shut out. I am always offended when someone seems to suggest that the smallness of our nation means that we can't be great. And that level of offense drives me to the place where I want to engage. I want to discuss. I want to fight back for that idea, because that's not the idea that I came up under. The idea that I came up under, that a small nation can be independent, can be strong. The idea that I came up under is that we have tremendous opportunity to be great. You know, I was privileged to work with and perhaps you were there from your old portfolio during Choga. You know, here was a man who was undergoing tremendous internal stress. Everything about his leadership was at stake. Demonstration was across the road, calling him different names. But in that space, with all of those external pressure, that man summoned the nations of the world to Nassau, to paradise, to say, let's have a conversation about the liberty of a man called Nelson Mandela. Let's have a conversation about what this thing called freedom means. And I believe, Miranda, he was able to respond to that because he came up by way of an oppressed place. He navigated a nation to what we refer to as independence. He championed the cause of ordinary people in a certain way, and then he gave us an image of a country that can be great. Lift up your head to the rising sun. And so I just believe that too much of that is in me to be silent when a country is going in a different direction.
So
and the
how do you
extent
take this? So how do you take it from this broad national scope? Because I really want to center it on you, because that's why we're here tonight. So
I got you.
In the national context of this liberty and the freedoms that we would have inherited or fought for in the spirit of the founding father. For those of you who are non-Bahamian, Sir Lyndon Pindling was the first prime minister of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. How do you take this national scope and translate that so that the persons who you seek to represent get to feel Glen Rolle in such a tangible way by the changes, the energy, the programs, the initiatives that he wants to bring into this constituency called Carmichael? So how do you channel all of that to affect the people that you seek to represent and serve?
I think it's a good question, because you have to begin somewhere. The system, you got to win a seat, and you got to do all of those different stuff. And you and I can appreciate sometimes that in a country like ours, no matter how sharp your voice is and what you have to offer, if you don't find yourself in that flow of what we call life politically, then the chances of your survival is very, very little. And so that could be one of the why too, in terms of getting into a vein that brings about certain influence, that brings about change.
Mhm.
But I do believe that before you get to talk about a constituency, you have to first be grounded in a belief system. And so what you would have heard is the context of which Glen Rolle is grounded in that belief system. So you rightfully say, Dan, I think you have to take that same national belief system and say, Carmichael constituency, in this case, have an opportunity to become the model for what this national image looks like. The community for which everything can sort of, not that you want to mimic everything, but you could say, here's what's working in the community. All right. So I thought about the national thing, and then I thought about it in the context of Carmichael. So if I could just share briefly what some of that context means,
Yeah,
right?
that's what I
Some of
want
that,
to hear. How do
yeah,
you
yeah,
translate
yeah,
that to these people?
yeah. So some of that context mean I do believe government is best when it's from the people, right? When people have a say in their democracy, when you go to parliament, you are an expression or an extension of that people. And so for me, representing an area that I am from is a key part to that. When my party asks for an example where I would have interest in, I simply said two places, Carmichael or Pinewood. And the two are one and the same because that's where I feel my family ties, my roots. That's where I identify with the people, etc., so that I don't have to be a misrepresentation if given the opportunity, because I should know about the bumps in the road. I should know about the traffic that are not moving. I should know about the fact that people in the Carmichael area feel sometimes that they have to drive all the way into town to get certain things done. So if I'm going to bring some relief, one of the first things that I want to do is bring relief to a people that says your government will be amongst you. Your government, you will have access right within your community. But even more importantly, you will get to say to your government, this is what we want, these are policies, these are belief systems, this is what we look for. And we expect you, when you're sitting around the national table, that you would reflect by way of our own expression what it is that we want. Notwithstanding the fact that I may have a view, except, but within the context of whatever process, by whatever process that we worked it out, we would want to know that. So for an example, within the first 6 months of my being elected as a representative, I want to put in place what I call a meaningful local government that may not necessarily have strength by law, but I would be prepared to subject myself to say we're going to have board of governors within the Carmichael community. We're going to have representative of the people. So when I sit around the table, while we may not be sitting with everybody, I will be hearing the voices of people in different areas, the social well-being of the people, the spiritual values of the people, what needs to be done so far as the development aspect of it, the economic component of the people. So whatever those pillars are. So I want that to be an important part of the conversation that I'm having with them, and the kind of governance that I lead, so that when I do go to other places, I would simply be a reflection, simply be an extension of that voice. This is not new for me. As chairman of the police association, this is what I had to do. Sit around the table with officers, hear their concerns, speak to what all of them may be saying, and find a way to communicate that in a common language where that's a reflection of every voice in there. We don't get that kind of representation in our present system. I don't want to get into the technical aspect of it, but I'll just use as an example. No one from Carmichael said they wanted a 12% VAT increase. No one from Carmichael. So where did these ideas originate from, where the representative of a grouping can go into a place and say something other than what? So I want to make that a significant pillar. Secondly, and I refer to that as local government, city government, by whatever definition we want to establish it. Secondly, I believe that Carmichael has tremendous economic opportunities. Again, where did this thinking come from? As goes Bay Street, so also goes Carmichael, right? In the context of economic viability, in the context of the city, in the context of where, but who should we preserve that for? Forgive me if I sound prejudiced, but I feel that people who move from one part to come into this area in terms of an opportunity to uplift themselves, I believe we should create a zone that says we will be a support system to you. If that means removing the tax burden, if that means offering certain incentive, so that some people who move into this area can now look at not only in terms of this as a community, but places where their business could strive, and the kind of relationship that we can develop within the context of our zone, within the context of our community. So I'm looking at what we refer to as an economic empowerment zone. That means, how do we relate to taxes? How do we relate to policies? What kind of things we put in place in the context of doing business within the community amongst each other. So for an example, if I have something that says I'm from the Carmichael area, then it means I could go into a shop and don't have to worry about a 10% hike in tax, etc. These are the type of things, but it begins, Miranda, at bringing the people together. It begins with a sense of unification. It begins with a sense that we can no longer be divided by politics. It begins with a sense that we are neither red, yellow, blue, green, whatever. We are residents of the Carmichael constituency. And so win or lose, for an example, I'm going to be here. I have no place to go. And that's why I believe representation must be by the people, for the people. But I also believe that you have to understand what people concern. So we have local government, we have economic empowerment zone. We just had the luxury of seeing the Shanae Millers and Stevie Gardner lift the Bahamas in a significant way. We have tremendous green space park here. Well, why can't Carmichael have its own 21st century sporting facility? You know, we have a gentleman who comes comes here, was coming in the community for 10 years by the tennis court, etc. When you look at some of those things, you look at them and say, we have so much potential. We have a generation in wait. If they have these opportunities, not only will the Shanae Miller Ubo be posted on the big TV screen, but we can have residents right from Carmichael, because you have access, because you have the facility, because you have this sense of unity. We can be the leading community in the context of sports. What does that mean? That means the flag being raised every time. So when I say 8 years or 2 Olympics from down the road, we're not saying that by accident. It means we're putting in place the infrastructure. It means we're putting in place the kind of governmental intervention. It means we're building the sense of community so that students that find themselves in those spaces can do so with a certain sense of excellence. But none of these things is realized except we have a sense of community, except we have a sense of brotherhood, except that we return to our spiritual values. All of these things could be made possible, but it calls for leadership, it calls for representation, and I believe as a resident of Carmichael that whoever leads this place need to be an expression of the voice of the people. And that's one of the reasons that I offered myself. I got in a bit late, but I'll share this story with you as what really prompted me, because I was having so much different conversation, and I really was wondering whether I should go after it again. And my daughter, who talks very little politics, so don't talk it at all, you know, and she was walking around and she just turned and she said, "Dad, if you don't run, I'm not voting." Mm. Think about that. So what did that mean to me? I look at my wife and I was silent for a moment, but I not only heard her voice, I heard the voice of a generation of lost hope in government, lost hope in representatives. So how do I be fair and true to me? To have somebody in my own house losing confidence in government when that's what confidence that my mother thought. That was why I became so passionate. And so I felt that in that, and of course, something else happened shortly after that. I got the call in respect of the Grand Commonwealth Party. And when I listened to their ideals and their values, and when I had conversations with some of the people around the table, I realized that this was not just unique to me, but a significant amount of Bahamians were undergoing the same kind of metamorphosis, the same kind of mindset that we can do better in our country and a nation. And election is about giving people those alternatives, giving them that option. And so I want to make a case over the next 10 days to the Bahamian people in that regard, but I'm not alone, you know. So you do have the Podesta Moores and the Michelle Malcolm and the Samuel Strongs and Antonio Millers and the Mrs. Wildgoose. You do have a significant amount of young people along with some others from other parties. But I'm just talking in the context of me identifying with a group of people who share this same sense of common values. Simon Smith and all of those who said we want to move the country beyond just breadcrumbs, because there's too much in this country. How do we know too much? Because the country undergo what I call reset. You talk about reserve and you talk about that today. The country undergo what I refer to as a moment of pause. During, then we were closed down. So the question for us is, what do we have within our hands? And within our hand is a significant amount of resources, the brightest minds, and all of these things. And I think that my candidacy, along with a number of other persons, lends itself to that type of dialogue. And we want to engage the Bahamian people in that regard.
So I heard so much in what you said. Summing it up, definitely for the constituency, it sounds like you want to create a city within the city, and with a
It is literally called, it is called City 2000. I don't want to separate it, but I do believe, Miranda, when a nation is undergoing its crisis, you need a model, you need a benchmark.
Right.
And those persons who left different communities, not knocking them, and branch out in this area, I believe they branch out in this area because they wanted a space to grow. And that's not only in terms of public space, but that's within the context of thinking big. And that's what I want to bring to the table again, that we have to think grand. We have to think big. There are too many significant markers that shows our greatness. And then we go right back into this dogma, this law, this sense of I don't want to say greed, but this sense of divide. And I don't think we can survive another generation of that. I really don't think so. So when I heard my daughter cry, I just had to put my foot back in, you know. I just had to make it.
Generally, there are a number of persons. I've been looking at polls and all those kinds of things that are still undecided. A number of persons, and the landscape at the moment in the country, I believe, for the first time, is littered with more political parties and independents than ever before in the history of our country. Being a journalist, from my background and covering, elections, several elections and rallies and all this stuff, even the whole face and shape of campaigning obviously has changed because of the coronavirus and all of the COVID-19 protocols that would have been put in place to some extent, because you still see mass gatherings in some places of people.
They ain't catch the meaning of Swerve yet. They are ignoring the very. I don't be political in this way, right? But this is one of the reasons we have to engage, because nation building is about accepting some things and doing the right thing. So Glen role leadership, for an example, will not ignore the science that says if you endanger your people and to put your people in this space, you will endanger them. The David model of leadership said, if any bear show up around my sheep, I can wipe the bear out. If any lion show up around my sheep, I'm gonna wipe the lion out. So leaders have to think within the context of shepherds. And this is another reason why I have no conflict. What does shepherd do? Protects its sheep. Go after the one that is lost. So, but in the context of this, we should be asking ourselves, well, okay, do I call election in this environment? Okay, election is gone. Or what would be the prevailing condition under which I engage them? I believe, Miranda, that God deliberately brought the country to a place of being students again, so that we can pause, so that we can hear sober conversation. And the sobriety of those conversations should lead us into the certain kind of decision making. I am confident that you are where you are because somehow along the line, something put you to a place to listen, to hear. Moses turned to see the bush burning. And then he realized what I believe that's where the country is. And I believe that is lending itself to why you have such significant number of persons still undecided. Because notwithstanding the degree to which there's significant political parties out there, something within us is telling us there's something different about this moment.
Hmm. There's something more.
I believe a part around them because I believe it lends itself to the country rediscovering itself in the context of our nation. Other kings were not necessarily meant for us to be more. You experience this as well as I do. If you go on a cruise or if you go any place and you tell the people from the Bahamas, you from the Bahamas or Paradise, they want to literally turn around and worship you
Hmm.
because they see you in a certain place. They see significance in you. So if that is the mantra that God has put on us, then it would require a kind of leadership who also sees us in the same manner. And rather than make policies that dumb us down, you'll give us policies that lift us up. And so that's part of what we want to do in Carmichael. That will be a message for the next couple of days. And I'm happy to have others around me who speaks in this same kind of sense, speak in the same kind of what this moment called for. And so we're going to make the case to the Bahamian people in that regard. And I hope that Carmichael would be the beneficiary of it. And I hope that I would be rewarded on the basis of where the nation needs to go and the extent to which I can provide the leadership in that regard.
Do you think you have enough time to first of all get the message out to as many, and this is not a sarcastic question or anything, but
No, no.
to get the message out to as many as need to hear it for the people that you need to reach, because you have, what is it, a week and a half to get that message out. So what are you doing? How are you spreading the message?
Obviously, there are limitations in terms of door to door, and that's not only because of my own situation. That's because of the present environment that we live in. Of course, there are people who are competing with various national platforms in terms of getting it out. You and I know the politics of our country that when it comes to certain time, third parties may be dumbed down. So you have to be creative. I'll say it in this way, I believe there are other Mirandas around the world. I believe God have a way to touching the hearts of the Mirandas and say, go call Glen, let's have a conversation. Because it is this kind of space that gives us the kind of conversation that better serves who I am, better serve what I want to say to the Bahamian people. You and I know that in some instances you go on certain platform, you almost have to be political. That's not what this moment is about.
Mm.
The solution to our to our challenges is not a political solution. The solution to our challenges is a God solution in
Mhm.
terms of his intent for nations, in terms of the kind of leadership, in terms of the kind of representation. And his model for leadership has always been the same. If you want to be great, serve. So what we have seen over the years, I think our people have been duped by a kind of leadership that wants to be served rather than to serve. And so you have to be deliberate if you want to follow the model of servant. You have to subject yourself. You have to put yourself in these molds that says, my voice will never rise above the voice of the people. And that comes, you were talking about your program, but Scars, you don't get there by way of just trying to be. You get there by way of having a life of scars. You get
Yeah.
there by way of having a life of pain. You get there by way of undergoing your own baptism. And your own baptism causes you to never rise yourself above certain things because the pain remains with you. And when the pain remains with you, it says, if this how you feel, then that's how the least of them feel.
Hmm.
And your own pain reminds you of what you have to deal with. So you don't turn your nose up. You don't become bigger than. You don't become impatient because your own scars that are left not only for you to see, but God knows where they are. Your own frailties are the best teacher in terms of adopting this idea that, hey, if you want to be great, serve. And service is not without its sacrifice and not without its pain.
If you're just joining us, I'm having a conversation with Glen P. Rolle, who is a candidate in the upcoming general elections in the Bahamas on September 16th. He's offering himself as the aspirant to be the
I
next member of
I
parliament
I
for
write I wrote on my page incoming representative for Kamai.
incoming representative. I stand to be corrected.
Yes,
Incoming
incoming.
representative for the Carmichael constituency. And you've heard, I wanted to have this conversation because I haven't had a conversation like this for a long time. When I was in mainstream, I was able to talk to candidates like this and ask them certain questions. But I wanted to have this conversation because I think it's important that, as you stated, the level of the conversation be elevated beyond what party you support and what color you wear, and to really be able to resonate in the hearts of people. This is why I want to serve, not just because I'm with this party or because I am independent of a party, but because I understand service. I understand, and I think you've made it so clear the correlation between how you serve as a pastor, even though there is going to be conflict,
Yeah, yeah.
that we know. But I think you've made it very clear the correlation between serving as a pastor and serving as a politician as well. Both are
He, eh, eh,
offices.
eh, he who becomes king must first be shepherd boy.
Absolutely. Both
Yes,
offices are the offices of servants.
yes.
So there's no mistaking that. We oh oh, good night, my cousin Cassio. Hey Cassio, he's Virginia Beach, man. You pulling in some people. So good
Wow,
night. It's good
wow.
to have you guys. Yeah. So you talked about what you see. Uh the constituency can evolve to and engaging the constituents there in conversation in regards to the things that can happen in that community about creating this economic empowerment zone,
Mhm.
etc. What do you see for the youth of that constituency?
Oh man. Oh, listen. Talk you and notwithstanding these gray bed. Um, um, like I said, the reason I mentioned my daughter is because when you reach a certain place, you begin to think about what that side looks like. Some of my own experience as a police officer, I had a chance to work down in Crooked Island for a couple of years, and my family was there. And I'm sharing this story in the context of the question that you asked. And the population was not big, but we developed what we call an after school program, just a sport, took the boys out camping from time to time and involved them in that way. And today as I speak, at least two of those young men are senior officers within the police force, senior within the defense force. One of the men is one of the leading deacon down in Crooked Island who choose to stay. But there was a significant amount of young men who went on to do certain things within the context of public service. So when I see that, I see it within the same context of the next generation. Where does that begin? That began with the idea that the next generation must be given a garment of righteousness, must be given a garment of fatherly love, must be given a garment of care, must be given a garment of no beginning. They must also, to me, they must also seem to be given a foundation of fresh beginning. That means in the context of opportunities for education. That means in the context to ensure that there is no social gaps within the context of single mothers, etc., etc. That's why I said to you, my scars are too known, my pain is too great for them to be left behind within the context. So every aspect of nation building must begin with them because that's who Jesus began with, except we be converted and become like these little ones. So how do I see them? How do I envision them? I see them as the opportunity to point in the direction that we go. That's why I talk about the sporting facility. Because 8 years down the road, the little boy that perhaps was one sentence away from the boys' industrial school finds activities in which he can now engage. His legs become his tool, and his leg becomes the means by which he wears this gold and this aquamarine as a part of the flag. Those are what we see. But young people will always rise up to the level of expectation that you see them. If
Mhm.
you dumb them down, then they would live out your own fulfilling dream. But if you lift them up, if you speak those things that be not as if they were, then they become and they fill that space. There's a young man, I saw him on my page this evening commending me for the Carmichael thing, but he was deemed or considered not the best police officer. And I would call him aside and I would write on his report. You know how this go, you write every 6 months and so. And I would write on his report and I would say certain things about him. And he would say, "But who is that?" I'd say, "That's the you I see in you. That's the potential that I see in you." And Miranda, without fail, 6 months later he become. 6 months later he become. We're at the place where there must be a new voice that speaks to the next generation. A voice that will not condemn them, a voice that will cover them, a voice that will give them access to all of the finer things in life. And that is found in the way we do our policies. That is found in the way we do certain things. I'll just give this as one example of what I mean in this way, right? So Linden put in place what we call national insurance, and there's a connection in this way. National insurance was intended to bridge the divide so far as the social infrastructure is concerned. But we know as we speak, Miranda, that the country is significantly rich in resources. It's just that it's not getting to us and to those to whom it belongs in a national way. So what does that mean to the next generation? Perhaps they have to now have a government that says, as a citizen of the Bahamas, notwithstanding your age, the fact that you were born a Bahamian. Prince Harry and them don't struggle with certain things because they were born into a certain space. I happen to believe that as a Bahamian, you are born into this place of great resources, great potential, great wealth. And even if we have to have custodians of certain things until certain things arrive, or means to put in place, we have to begin to say to the next generation, we are not who they say we are. You know, we are not the persons on the side of the road having crumbs. Yes, that is the condition that they have constantly feed us. And it becomes worse when a government is a part of those type of policy making. But we have to find a way now to translate the wealth of the nation to the citizens of the Bahamas so that when we grow up in this space, we grow up in this space of confidence, we grow up in this space of great care, we grow up in this space where education becomes a part of a natural ability. We grow up in this space where we appreciate that not out of our own might, but God has blessed us in the great and the richest place in the world. That's the effect of the Linden Pillen on my life. That's the effect of what I believe the founding fathers envisioned. And so they talk about this place in grand terms, in a commonwealth. We've got to bring what we refer to as that commonwealth mean. So what does that mean? That means for the mother who may be single, we're going to put in place the kind of system to support you until such time you find yourself in different places. We have to take those things on if we're going to salvage and preserve the next generation. I think we owe it to them to be caregivers and caretakers of the seed that God has entrusted to us.
So you want to make the wealth common for those for everybody. I want to switch gears and go to the fact that, or acknowledge the fact that you also seek to represent a constituency that's multicultural,
Mhm.
extremely multicultural. And so by that, I mean, of course, there are Bahamians, there's a large, I guess, block of Haitian nationals and other nationals that live within that constituency all
Mhm.
around. What how do you reach them? How do you connect with these people, a lot who speak a different language? And how do you connect with these people and begin to embrace and engage them in this vision of what you have for that area?
I think that first comes with acknowledging that we have not been true to ourselves, right? I refer to this moment as the reset moment. And the reset moment allows you to go back and look at some things and put in place the measure that brings you to where we need to go. And part of that begins with the understanding that as the Bahamas, we have to first identify what this nation was meant to be in the first place. And multicultural by its very nature, while it is acceptable, it must find itself within the context of what this nation was meant to be in the first place. And so that that means in some place correcting some issues. That means in some place what we call grandfathering or saying here's what the new Bahamas is going to look like. That may mean all of those different things. I don't believe, for an example, that a nation our size could have afforded what I call multiple languages in the context of building within communities. I think the Bahamas was is too small a nation to have found all of these external forces on it before we had time to find ourselves. So this moment, 50 years later, I believe it gives us the opportunity to relook at all of the things that we have done and put in place the measures that gets us where, and so that anyone in or coming in understand what the value systems look like, and that include our language, that include ensuring that there is one flag lifted in our country, etc., etc. But it must be done from the seat of who we are. And who are we? We are compassionate people. We are a caring people. The Bahamas has always lent itself to sharing beyond its borders, but it must be within the context of who we are, where we're going, and the extent to which anyone live within those spaces have to equally buy into this idea of what Bahamian means. And that don't mean say to people who cannot speak a certain language, but certainly then, if you're going to be a part of a community, you must also embrace the language of the community that you're a part of. Is it easy? No, but that's a part of what this moment called for. It calls for us saying, where did we go wrong? How do we correct it so that we can move on with the kind of unity where people from around the world come and share and be a part, but not at the expense of our own sense of who we are, etc., etc. So I do believe Carmichael, again within the context of a model, have to be a representation of what that means in terms of oneness, in terms of understanding this idea of humanization, but also in terms of people who are equally a part of this community buying into this idea of humanization. So even if you speak in different language, you can still have the cultural way of life. You can still embrace our own ideas and be a part of that as one people. Because at the end of the day, we're all from this thing called humanity. We're all from this thing called the human race. So notwithstanding our own uniqueness, I think we still have to carve out within the context of Carmichael and within the context of the broader Bahamas, what was this idea of dehumanization in terms of our lifestyle, language, way of life, etc. And those who come in or who are here equally buy in and become a part of that.
I'm glad you brought that full circle because there are some things that you said that may be a little comfortable
Mhm.
at the moment at that particular time. But I'm glad you brought it full circle because in my mind I'm saying they're here. They're not going anywhere. They'll forever be a part of
No,
this
no, no,
country
that,
and
that,
our
that,
nationhood. What I'm saying is they'll forever be a part of our country and our nationhood, whether legal or illegal. And I understand the whole concept of the original intent of what Bahamianization was all about. I believe in the integration of them into the communities, and I just don't think that to date we've done a good enough job as a country. Whether we were prepared or not, they're here, and they have been here. I My recollection as a child, like they've always been here. I remember just growing up among just foreign nationals, and I'm not only just talking
Yeah,
about
yeah,
Haitian nationals, by
yeah.
the way, because just by nature of the fact that the Bahamas is a metropolitan, a melting pot of so many. I think we have at least 150 countries,
Mhm,
citizens represented in that little country, as you say,
mhm,
from different nations.
mhm,
So we are that type of country and environment that attracts people from different races and socioeconomic backgrounds and cultures all around the world, because that is who we are. How we integrate them and how we set up programs that cause them to want to be integrated is a whole other level, because this is a general statement.
it is.
Generally, Bahamians tend to be prejudiced.
Mhm, mhm,
Generally,
mhm,
right? So nobody don't come for me.
mhm,
Generally,
mhm,
we tend to be a prejudiced type of people, and we
mhm,
do discriminate.
mhm,
Those That's the elephant in the room. We do that,
mhm,
and by doing that, we overtly make it uncomfortable for the person who wants to. I think about back in the day, I used to be a youth advisor and worked with a lot of teenagers who were um, Bahamian parent, one parent Bahamian, the other foreign, or both foreign but born here. You know, when they get to that 18, it's time now to apply
mhm.
to get their citizenship. And I've watched over the years how heartbroken so many of those kids are to this day, because they still have yet to achieve a piece of paper that says to them, you are a citizen of this
What,
country and
yeah,
you
yeah,
belong here,
yeah.
right? I even know
What,
of intimate stories of people very close and connected to me, a young man in particular. He's going to be 25 this year. Just as he turned 18, he applied. He is yet to get his documents and everything. So what I'm saying is our system has placed some people in a predicament where they want to integrate,
but
they want to identify,
but
but they don't have the necessary requirements, requisite documents, rather, I would say, in order for them to feel a part of. That's something that needs to be addressed and fixed
and
permanently, and not just during election cycles.
yeah. And I wanted to respond to that because it's part of what, when I use the term reset moment, we have to look at all of these things. And that's why I said earlier, we have to first acknowledge
Mhm.
and when I say we, I don't necessarily mean the citizenry. I mean,
Yeah.
governments have to acknowledge that we have erred in our ways. I equally share certain stories. I picked up the phone yesterday. She is now a part of a citizen, but I remember talking to her about 10 years ago in tears, you know, because here was a person, like you said, who had reached a certain age, had gone time after time to immigration. This can't be a formula for governance. And when these failures occur, it means that trickle down into affecting the way of life of the citizen, because now you have the clash of these different things. I wouldn't agree with you in the context of Bahamians in a certain way. I do think, however, that Bahamians, when their space is threatened, when their space becomes vulnerable, then they act out the vulnerability of that space. But who do I believe share the burden for that? I believe the government bears the burden for allowing its citizens to be in a space where they're not comfortable, where they have to feel that they have to fight or defend for themselves. And how do they do that? They have to do it in the context of where the economic system is not in alignment with the values of the country. But they also have to do that when we don't put in place the kind of protection measures to ensure that we have proper immigration policies and proper things. So this reset moment allows us to acknowledge all of that, restore certain things that needs to be restored so the nation can begin to breathe again. And that is found in a multiple ways. Education, yes, but that is also found in the context of us as Bahamians carving out what this idea looks like, so that whether we're in or we're out, people can buy in to become a part. Because I do believe we have a model that all of the world wants to follow. World marking the man of your bearing. I believe that is included in terms of us opening our gates to people who want to come in and live out this Bahamian experience. And that goes
People are,
beyond
and
just
my point, my point is they are here and they have been here from
no,
all over the
yes,
world.
no,
They literally
yeah,
have been.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so I think we're saying the same thing. And I did remember I
yeah,
did emphasize generalization. So I
yeah,
know it's
yeah,
not everybody,
yeah,
but
yeah,
there
yeah.
is generally people so that are and they do discriminate, and we don't like to acknowledge those things, but it exists. It
Mhm.
always has, and people do just look at people in some regards again
Mhm.
and discriminate against them just because. I mean, that's what it is,
Well,
and we'll
well,
never fix it. We don't acknowledge, as you said, we'll never fix it. And
well,
so
Carmichael will be an expression of a multicultural, but within the context of us as a Bahamian, we could play a rake and scrape and do other stuff within the
mhm.
context of who we are as a people. So I expect all of those things to be fleshed out in this, what you call it, metropolitan multicultural
That's
center.
what it is. York A. Sands, good night, York says, unfortunately, most Bahamians don't wish to share their country. We have to be fair with children who were born in the Bahamas. These people will feel connected and will be more productive. I do believe, as I stated, and I will continue to herald it, we need to do more to engage, and we need to set something that is established. We need to change some things. If it means a constitutional change, then we need to look at that.
But,
And I know
but,
it
but
might be different.
I mean, Miranda, the first thing they got to do is just follow the law. If the law say 18 years, you do it.
But
Eh?
that's what's been done, and people are still been sitting in limbo in some cases. And like I said, remember now, this is a conversation, and these are general things, because there are always exceptions and different things happen for different people. But there are a significant number of people that are sitting in limbo that have applied at the time when they said they were 18 years old, and of yet because of that, we know they cannot be documented. So they don't have passports, they don't have any sort form of IDs. They don't have bank accounts. They cannot attend university at that level. They cannot participate in anything at that sort. And I'm not faulting anybody, except that we need to, since the
It,
people
ha-
exist,
it,
since they're
it,
not going
it,
anywhere,
it, it,
then we
it
need to
has
work.
it has to be resolved, and it has to be resolved within the context of what you said there here. So
Right.
reset moment for me means wherever something is wrong, you fix it. You find the governmental or political courage to fix it so the nation can breathe and move again. And that include all of the things that you mentioned. Because we cannot sustain a people who know no other place, and when they reach a certain age, they don't have the liberty to go on to with the second phase. So that's not acceptable. And I think that's a part of what we have to resolve within the context of moving the country forward. I
Absolutely.
sometimes see this as the redemptive moment. Okay, certain things went wrong then, but hey, we got to build a bridge. We got to move forward. And here's what the moving forward looks like.
Let's now turn again to what happens if you don't get elected. What happens in terms of
I,
what you do, in terms of the ideas that you've proposed that you want to work with? What does that look like, and will you collaborate with whomever may win if it's not you, if they are willing to embrace and engage you as a part of the process to build the community.
Let me say this, right? Because I want to say this to the Grand Commonwealth Party as an organization, right? Notwithstanding the extent to which our conversation was limited to me, but I think when it comes to that question, that when I engage the leader of the party, Mr. Simon Smith, and some of the executive behind the scene, what made this marriage the marriage was because our idea of nation building is not limited to politics. And anyone who enters governance thinking or politics or governance simply to think it's about that element, they miss the very foundation upon which this nation was built. This nation was built from a sense of community, local government, church, the labor forces. All of those things became a part of this stretch for freedom. And so my marriage to this organization was their appreciation for the singular fact. No, let me put it this way first. When I was contacted about this group who I didn't know at the time, I laid a condition. I said, if I'm going to be a part of this group, then this group must be about what I refer to as righteous governance within that broad context. So that was established as one of the core values. But importantly to your question, when they engaged me, it was from the exact thing that you said. We're not necessarily looking for someone who's just into this for an election cycle. Mm-hmm. This is about representation to the community. And that representation may come in terms of 5-year blocks or 5-year agreement or 5-year understanding, whatever you want to call it. And so my commitment to Carmichael, even though I'm going to win, my commitment to Carmichael, based on the very philosophy of this organization, is we're in this for representation. We're in this to see how we can lift up our brothers. We're in this to say, notwithstanding you may have a political candidate who's successful, Glen Rolle represents the face of the Grand Commonwealth Party within the community of Carmichael, because we're going to steer projects, we're going to steer community service, we're going to do what we do within those communities. Politics just happens to be one of the mains. We're going to engage churches. We're going to engage civic partners. We're going to engage the local community. If no single vote goes to Glen Rolle, we're going to be doing the same kind of service. Though we acknowledge, Miranda, that the construct of a nation is also based on the kind of policies that you put in place. So it is important to have significant partners who understand community building, who are prepared to lend. And so I have never withheld my service, except if someone wants my service to advance policies that I believe is harmful for our people. So you can't get me to support you if you want to put a burden on the people that is beyond their expectation. So the extent to which a representative is a reflection of the voices of the collective in Carmichael, Glen Rolle could be their support, because only one side I'm going to find myself on, and that is, where are the people? In this case, the people and the residents of Carmichael, and to what extent I can be an extension and lend myself. I think you noticed I ran in Pinewood the last time, and shortly after we got defeated, the member of parliament, Mr. Ruben Rahman at the time, asked myself, asked Alicia Hart and others to join him and to do certain things in Pinewood. And it was without any hesitation, because it's about service. And so, yeah, we're going to win, but our service would be here irrespective of politics. And that's because that's the philosophy and the driving force behind what the Grand Commonwealth Party is about.
Just one final comment from York, since he said they qualify to apply. I guess he's referring to immigrants They qualify to apply, but after the long wait for application, then we see the long process with years and years of waiting under a process that is intentional to frustrate and prolong. We should normalize who were born here or who were allowed to stay for a long period after this exercise and reset moment. Then we move to the phase of no tolerance regarding illegal movement. That is something that has to be obviously discussed
Yeah,
at that level of
yeah.
legislation that has
I
to be
yeah,
passed.
I think you're, by the way, is one of our colleagues, so you could appreciate the kind of thinking that we bring to the table. He is the candidate for the Andrews area, and so when you have that kind of mindset, Michelle Malcolm, who your former colleague, Podesta Moore, I mentioned some other name, Michelle Wildgoose, Sammy Strong, all of those. This is the type of thinking that goes into that conversation. So, notwithstanding the hour that we came out, and you said the lateness of the hour. The last time I checked, Miranda, the person who came in at the 11th hour is awarded the same pay.
Well, they say
So,
it's 2 weeks on the ground, and that's what they
so,
normally
so,
say.
so they asked him, how did this fellow who came in at 11 hours paid one penny? Jesus said, don't fault me for that. So, notwithstanding our time, what we do and the ideas that we bring and the conversation that we have is going to be rewarded because, like you said, that large number of people out there, they're looking for a meaningful conversation. And obviously, your level of engagement helps to bring that kind of conversation. I wish you could interview our entire team as a part of it. We don't do that.
Glen P. Roll. On that note, we bring to an end this conversation. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you guys for always swerving with me. We're here every Sunday night at 8 o'clock, where we have
Yeah,
adult conversations for mature
they go.
audiences only.
Listen. They go deep, y'all. They go deep.
We
She
have
she she
adult
she
conversations.
she switched into a little governmental, conversation, but they have real talk. They have real talk, y'all. So eight
And thank
o'clock on
thank
Sunday.
you for following and watching us. I appreciate you. All the best in your endeavor. And the one thing that we do know is that the steps of good men are ordered by the Lord.
Yeah,
And
thank
so
you so much.
whatever would be the outcome, we know that it would be the Lord's doing.
Yes,
And we will continue to serve
yeah,
in
thank
whatever
you so
way.
much. Thank you so much for having me. It's really been refreshing. It's good to see you. And for those persons who may not know, she is incognito in another place. But hey,
No,
I'm proud of
everybody
the
knows I'm
way.
in Dallas. People who follow me know
Okay,
that's where
okay,
I am.
okay,
This
all
is
right.
just
I didn't want to be the one who expose your secret
Oh no,
location.
you have to
But
understand. This is a show where we're transparent. We don't have anything to hide, and that's why
okay, okay.
we're able to have the levels of conversations that we have because people feel comfortable. They know they're in a safe space with me and they can talk and open up about anything. Nothing is rehearsed.
But but
And
but 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 the reason I mention that is because notwithstanding your distance, not only are we engaging, but to see the light and the glow in your face makes us all proud that this is the face of what we call this idea of behemoth, that we could go and strive and become, and we're truly, I believe, what we call, and maybe Bahamians are a little in this way, right? That we did not choose him, he chose us. He chose
yeah,
us to be his representation. And I don't think we should shy away from that. I think we should embrace that. I think the next generation will be better off by taking on their God identity. And I believe the nation will live and find itself. And I believe part of our responsibility within the context of politics is to communicate those ideas and those values so that we can begin to think grand again, so that we can embrace this idea of shared wealth and the commonwealth here in the Bahamas. So thank you so much for having me. I truly enjoyed it.
thank you.
Love
Thank
it.
you for
And
stepping up and stepping in.
yes,
It certainly has been very, very enlightening and engaging. And once again, all the best to you. Don't go anywhere. But this brings to an end another edition of Swerve with Me. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. We do this every Sunday night at 8 o'clock. Feel free to stop by anytime. Until next week, have a wonderful week, everybody. Bye bye.
Bye bye.